Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're specifically going to talk about dungeon mastering and belts for dungeon mastering. Now, I know where you're going. You're like, wait, belts for dungeon mastering? That's kind of unusual. It is. It is unusual. Let's talk about it. So, yeah, it's actually a pretty unusual thing. So, why would we need this? So, first of all, dungeon mastering is now 48 years old. And I think it is really being embraced now as a distinct discipline. And there are easily 1,000 commentators on Dungeons and Dragons that will tell you this is how you dungeon master. This is good advice for dungeon mastering. This is how you dungeon master better. There's easily 1,000 different sources just on YouTube alone that will give you distinct advice on how to be a better dungeon master, right? So, with that said, this is growing as a discipline, and I've been thinking about, one of the issues that we have right now is there isn't a standard. There's no standard to say this is how it's done right and this is how it's done wrong. And you're like, well, the standard could be Wizards of the Coast, but it's really not. Wizards of the Coast stands in a very strange place as far as declaring what good dungeon mastering is and what good dungeon mastering is not. One of the things is Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons and Dragons, right? Dungeon mastering is a discipline, and their product says this is the dungeon mastering role, and this is what you're going to use dungeon mastering for. However, their commercial relationship to Dungeons and Dragons makes it difficult for them to actually be the arbiter of what is good dungeon mastering and what is not, right? So one of the things I would really love to see that I think we very much need, we need to move to a point where we have belts exactly like the martial arts for dungeon mastering. Now we could, you could do, ribbons, you could do medals, you could do levels, you could have but I actually really think that the belt system for martial arts would be perfect, right? You have a white belt, you have a blue belt, you have a green belt, you have a brown belt, you have a black belt, right? And some of the schools will put different belts in there. That right there, let's see, if we're doing white, green, blue, brown, black, right? That's five belts, right? And you would need to progress through this. And in the martial arts, this is done, right? So if you want to say, okay, these are two martial artists, which one is better? The guy with the black belt is going to be better than the guy with the woman with the black belt is going to be better than the woman with the brown belt, okay? There isn't a question, right? They have proven, right, through testing, through competition, through a rigorous established process, which one of them is better. And I really think we need this for dungeon mastering. And one of the reasons why is right now, there's 1,000 mouths squawking on YouTube about how to be a better dungeon master. And trust and believe, nobody knows who to listen to, right? Everybody's got a different opinion, and no one is speaking from authority, right? However, this problem is already solved in martial arts. They definitely know what they're doing there. They have established processes, and they're like, hey, we have managed this problem. We know who's good, we know who's better, and we know who's the best, right? And there's a process for bringing people up through the ladder. And I think this would be really extremely good for dungeon masters. So let's talk about it. How would we get there, and how would we shape this, right? So first and foremost, this is one of the good things or actually one of the challenges is karate, right? Like there are multiple schools for karate, and they can all put out their belts, and their belts are generally recognized by each of the other schools. But this only happened because karate doesn't have one commercial owner, right? So right out of the gate, you would need to solve the problem of ownership and who's going to do this. And believe it or not, in my opinion, there's no possibility that Wizards of the Coast would ever do this, right? One, I don't think they would see the profit in it. Two, I think their commercial relationship to Dungeons and Dragons would very much stop them from actually it would very much stop them from doing what they needed to do to actually be a good arbiter and to let people progress up this chain. It simply wouldn't work. I don't think they would be interested in doing it, and I don't think they would do it. And they have too many fingers in the pie to to be a good arbiter of this, and to be, they just couldn't be trusted with it. So right then you hit a wall, because Dungeon Master is to my knowledge, is a legally owned term by Wizards of the Coast, right? And everybody can say their opinion, but nobody can speak with authority, right? So one of the things you would have to do, unfortunately, and I wish we wouldn't have to do this, but you would need to place a different term for there that people would understand as Dungeon Master, right? So what could you do? So one, I know people would say right out of the gate, Game Master. However, I don't really think that would be useful, right? Because Game Master is actually a functional term already. It means you do the same tasks as a Dungeon Master, but specifically not for Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, one of the reasons why people play Dungeons and Dragons is so that they can use the term Dungeon Master, right? Because if you're not running Dungeons and Dragons, you sure as heck should not be using the term Dungeons and Dragons, because you don't deserve to use it, and it's not appropriate to use on any game except Dungeons and Dragons, which carries Gary Gygax's legacy, and Gary Gygax specifically created the Dungeon Master, and it's unique, right? So I would not use Game Master. So I've said it a couple times here. I would use, and I know this, I would use Rarbiter, Arbiter with an R at the front, right? New term, role-playing arbiter, right? And so, and this way you could just say, this is for anyone who does the function of running a tabletop role-playing game, whatever game it is. It could be the oldest game in the world, it could be the best game in the world, or it could be a game that is not the oldest game or the best game in the world, right? It could be any tabletop role-playing game, inclusive of all role-playing games. So first of all, I would say a Rarbiter, right? And make it clear that any tabletop role-playing game that was being played with this, you could use this term, right? So, one, make it generalized. You would have to respect Wizards of the Coast's legal right to Dungeon Master, right? They have a legal right to that. They bought it. They own Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeon Master belongs exclusively to Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't belong to any other game, right? And it's highly inappropriate to use it with any other game, in my humble opinion. So you would go with Rarbiter, right? So once you do that, once you establish Rarbiter, one, I think that Rarbiter should be allowed to go across multiple schools, and there should be multiple schools. Multiple schools, just like the martial arts. There's more than one karate school, right? And they have their own rankings, but they all use belts, right? They all use belts, and there's a system of belts. And you can even change the colors. You can have a different number of belts. You can have a different path to those belts. But there would need to be one standardized, and I would standardize it at white, green, blue, brown, black, period, right? Black belt, Rarbiter, right? And that means you've gone through all the material. So what would it take to do this? Like, how would you level up? So I think the first thing you would need to do, and this is incredibly important, just like any certification, the first thing you would need to do is you would need to actually identify people. So the first all of this would be actually identifiable to one person. This is very, very important. When you go to college and you get a degree or you get a certification, that is attached to you personally. This is kind of a small. There's so much digital now. I feel like you need to understand. And people are like, oh well, Pumpkin Boy 77 just graduated and he's a brown belt. Nobody gives a crap about Pumpkin Boy 77. Sally Smith, right, of Brooks Mill, Michigan, is given this belt, right? And it would need to be publicly declared by the institution, saying, hey, just like, right, like you can request somebody's transcripts from a college, right? So the first thing you need to do is say, this is going to be attached to a real identity, right? Once you do that, you can say, you sign in with this school, and once you sign in and you are accepted as a student of the school, right? You would have to pay just like any other school, right? You would receive your white belt. You would become a white belt arbiter, right? Now, what would you need to do? At that point, you go into the school and you would need to begin running games. So first of all, you'd be trained to run games, right? Trained in the way of the school. And then at that point, you would begin running games, and those would have to be witnessed, right? And there would have to be a process to have somebody witness your game. And these schools could definitely be distributed, right? Like, so the school could have one person in the state who goes and watches the person run their game and say, okay, I've seen this person run 3 games. Their game is going well. They're being respectful to their players. They have a strong sense of the narrative. They have a strong sense of the rules of the game, and they honor the game, and they honor our school, and and this person is ready to progress from white belt arbiter to green belt arbiter, right? And then once you go to green belt, right, you would have to write your own adventure, okay? And then once you go to blue belt, right, you would have to publish your adventure, right? Then for brown, you might have to run your published adventure, right? And then for black, it could be it could be something really significant like running an entire campaign that check-in, and basically the professors or like the instructors for the school would be checking in during the campaign, and the players would be able to give private feedback saying, I think this person did their best they could to run this game. I've seen them all the way through, right? And actually, I think I would back that up and do that last step for a brown belt. And then I would have a period of I would do it just like a traditional college degree. I'm tempted to set it at 4 years, but I think 2 years. You would need to put the person, in order to become a full black belt, they would need to show the ability to play, to actually run games, keep players, write their own adventures, publish their own adventures, and do that over a period of time with positive feedback from their players, and then positive feedback from the reviewers, the school's reviewers of their game, popping in whenever they wanted in like a 20 session, 40 session, maybe even a 60 session group of campaigns. And that might be 2 campaigns, no more than 4 campaigns, right? But they would need to prove that they could do this over time, and then they would get their black belt. So that's the way I would go about setting up black belt arbiters and establishing a strong platform to make all of that work. Yeah. So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear how you would go about the same task. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please consider liking and subscribing. Have a wonderful millennium.